All right, so we're going to jump right into our next speaker. This is another one I've been excited about. This gentleman is a motivational speaker, a mindset coach, a personal trainer devoted to helping clients to feel comfortable in their own skin, as well as remembering they are loved. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Eric Shawn.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Eric Shawn. And what I want to do is I want to take you on a journey. And I think that by the time we get to the end of the journey, we're going to realize we're on the same journey. The journey of self-discovery, the journey of happiness, meaning, purpose. Does the journey sound familiar? And see, we all started the journey off the same, lying in a crib, smiling, content with just being. When we were 5 or 6, we could sit in a 4x6 space and bring the whole world in front of us. Our eyes so full of gleam, the dreams. But as we grew, things began to change. And that change could have taken place for each of us at different parts of our life, but at some point, it happened. The journey. The fantasy of life began to feel more like Mission Impossible. The fantasies, they faded. See, for me, that change happened as a child, growing up in foster care, the abuse, being raised by a different race, the identity crisis, the alcoholism. But for you, it could have been one too many heartbreaks, the abuse, the sexual abuse, the rejection, the teasing, the racism, the feeling defeated. But for all of us at some point, the fear of living took over. We began to seek comfort over soaring, existing over thriving. You know, it reminds me of a quote by Les Brown. Most of us die at 25, but we don't get buried until we're 65. Still sound a little familiar? And of course it does, because we're all the same. But see, the fear begins to separate us. We run off into our own little sandboxes and we cry in the sand. We begin to judge ourselves and we begin to compare our insides against your outsides until we're convinced we're the only ones suffering. One of my first spiritual mentors was a Buddhist sensei, and he often would say things and I'd be like, I don't understand what you're saying, but this one thing I caught on to. He would say, we're swimming in water up to our chin, yet we're dying of thirst. And what he meant by that is that we're all suffering, yet we feel like we're the only ones. There's help all around us, but we feel like we're the only ones suffering. And I understood that. Because see, when I was a child, you couldn't tell me that I was the only one suffering when I was being raised by my white father in a neighborhood that looked nothing like the ghetto I grew up in. You couldn't convince me that I was just like everyone else when I was being beaten as a child. See, you couldn't convince me because I was too busy convincing myself that I was useless, broken, devalued. See, ladies and gentlemen, my circumstances became my story. I want to ask you, and I want you to look and dig deep down inside as you answer. How many of you have taken responsibility for your abuse? How many of you have blamed yourself for your assaults? How many of you have judged and valued yourself based off your conditions? If I weren't so awkward, they wouldn't tease me. If I was smarter, I would have picked better men. If I was just like everyone else, I wouldn't be going through this. And I truly understand, because for many years of my life, I took the responsibility for other people's hurt. And I say that because today I understand that hurt people hurt people. So as we sit here today, I ask you, how do we allow the journey to shift? How do we once again allow Mission Impossible to be Mission Impossible? If you take the word impossible and you just slightly change your viewpoint, you look at it from a different angle, we realize that impossible is spelled the same as I'm possible. And that's how the journey changes. We change our viewpoint. We change our perception. We take in new information and we allow that new information to shift and change our old perceptions. A couple years ago, I was seeking some new information and I came across a quote by Napoleon Hill. And the quote said, "Fears are states of mind." And that day it occurred to me, and I took it a step further, and I realized that if fear is a state of mind, then love, happiness, purpose, passion, joy, all have to be states of mind. A couple months later, I came across a very interesting story about a woman who, even when she was a child, she knew she wanted to get paid for her voice. But life had been so unfair to her. She began being molested at the age of 9. The molestation lasted until she was 12. When she was 14, she gave birth to a baby boy who died. She would have made a perfect victim. She could have went through her whole life imprisoned by her circumstances, and we would have all understood. But she was able to view her life from a different angle. She was able to reach inside, grab a hold of something, and keep moving. And you might have heard of her. Her name is Oprah Winfrey. You see, ladies and gentlemen, too often, too many times, we bear the responsibility of events that took place decades ago, and we replay them and replay them and replay them, and they continue to keep us paralyzed. See, what I've discovered is, and I want you to do me a favor and write these questions down. What I've discovered is that if we want to change our perception, we must be able to ask ourselves and answer some honest questions. Number one, am I willing to believe in myself again? Number two, am I willing to believe that I am worthy of happiness? 3, am I willing to take control of my life right here, right now? The decisions and the results of the decisions. And most important question of all, am I willing to stop being the victim? You see, ladies and gentlemen, being the victim, we never win. We have to wait for somebody else to give us permission. We have to wait for something else in life to change in order for us to be able to live. I want you to say out loud with me right here, right now. Starting right here, right now, I will no longer be a victim. I retake control of my life. Because if you're the victim, then you have to wait for somebody to give you power and permission to live and to change. And if you have to wait for somebody to give you the power and permission to change and to live, then you are not in control of your life. And change is all an inside job. The one thing that I know is we are all responsible, not for the things that have occurred because life deals bad hands, but we are responsible for the way that we perceive them. We're responsible for how we take in that information and how we show it off to the rest of the world. That we are responsible for. I want to tell you a story. Mike was an executive for a big corporation. Got paid a lot of money, hated almost every aspect of his job. Mike kind of, even though he had a lot of red flags, he got married, knew he shouldn't have got married. The marriage lasted long enough for them to have this wonderful son named John. Mike would get John every other Friday, pick him up after school, drop him off at his mom's house at 5 p.m. on Sunday. This one weekend, he knew he had to pick John up and he felt guilty because he never spent time with John. John was basically being raised by the TV and video games. And he made the commitment and he told John that this weekend is going to be our time. Friday, when he's about to leave work, he gets handed this stack of papers. Nothing new. But he made this commitment to John. He leaves, goes pick John up. He arrives in front of the school. Now, I warn you, John is 5 years old and full of energy. He picks John up. John hops in the car and he's like, Daddy, Daddy, it's our time, our time, our time. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? What are we going to do? The guilt begins to set in. They arrive home. John hops out the car and he's like, I'm about to play with my daddy. I'm about to play with my daddy. More guilt. They make it inside. John goes to his room. Mike goes into his office. He's sitting at his desk. He happens to be looking at this magazine, and it's a National Geographic. On the cover of the National Geographic is a picture of a globe of the world. He gets this brilliant idea. John comes running in. He says, John, come on, this is what we're going to do. They rush out into the living room. John rips the cover, Mike rips the cover off the magazine, rips it into 100 pieces of paper, drops it on the floor. He says, John, we're going to play puzzle. When you're done with this, come back, we're going to play. Goes back in his office, very proud of himself, knew that he bought enough time to organize some stuff and still have some time with John. 5 minutes later, John comes running back in. He's like, Daddy, I'm done. On to the next thing, next thing, next thing. What are we going to do? Mike can't believe it. Walks into the living room. Sure enough, the world is put back together. He's like, John, how did you do this so fast? He said, Daddy, I cheated. He said, there was a picture of the man on the other side. And when I put the man together, the world fell into place. Ladies and gentlemen, that's life. It's an inside job. We're responsible for how our life ends up. We are in the driver's seat. We cannot afford to play victim. We must take control. The journey of life does not have to be mission impossible. It can be mission impossible. And it all starts here. It's your life. Get to living.